All right, new review, new crazy legendary here for Paladin. Hi, Exarch Yrel. This is a character people have wanted for a really long time. Just got revealed. 8 mana, 7/5. Battle Cry. If your deck has no neutral cards, ultimate pure Paladin card here. Gain Rush, Lifesteal, Taunt, and Divine Shield. Boy, does that sound familiar. That sounds a lot like ZILLIAX, the best Hearthstone card in history. That's exactly right. Enormous swing potential on High Exarch Yrel here. Because you're going to heal for 7. You're going to clear something insane on board. You're going to leave behind a really solid taunt body that still has big attack value and lifesteal. So, yeah, I mean, as far as late game swing cards go, this one's pretty nuts. Now, I'll be honest, it's still not as good as ZILLIAX because it's 8 mana, and often you need those swing cards and heals to come a little bit earlier in the game. You know, ZILLIAX was 5 mana. That was kind of the perfect spot there for ZILLIAX. He also had some magnetic upsides that Yrel here doesn't have, and he didn't have, of course, deck building restrictions. All that said, though, I still think Yrel has a lot of potential to be a solid card. We've already seen Pure Libram Paladin be something that works really well. It thrives nicely on falling behind a little bit, healing up a ton, and then flipping a board state on the back of like Libram of Hope and these sorts of things. And Yrel plays right into that. She's perfect as another late game bomb. You throw down, you swing the board, you heal a ton, and your opponent potentially never recovers on the back of this threat. Now, that said, she's very limited in her impact and deck utility because it's only Pure Paladin that's going to make a lot of sense here, I think, for Yrel. In other words, like Big Paladin, not exciting because this is all based on a battle cry. It's not just an effect that exists. So you can't like squeeze her into Big Paladin. Highlander Paladin would be awfully tough to make work. Things like N'Zoth Paladin almost certainly won't work because N'Zoth is a neutral minion, not fitting for Pure Paladin. So she is kind of like all or nothing. That said, Pure Paladin already makes sense. It's already a deck that has proven itself pretty darn well with the Libram package. And I think a card like this could help it keep up as metas evolve and as we see new decks come into the fray. When you get just big power cards like this dumped into a deck that already works, that's a great sign that it's going to at least make a little bit of sense as that sort of tier 2, tier 3 thing. Maybe it even propels it higher into tier 1 because I think this is an awfully big swing card in that ZILLIAX style. And also very reminiscent, by the way, of Shirvala. So stat line wise, pretty cool there to kind of fuse those two worlds together in Paladin in one of the most iconic characters and lore characters we haven't seen yet in Hearthstone. She's a pretty big one people love, is really one of the most famous Draenei characters, and we don't have a lot of Draenei anyway. So love this card. I think it's going to be really solid. Maybe not, you know, ZILLIAX levels, but still very, very good. Playable card in a proven deck. That's all a recipe for success. A lot of unity and precision and perfection here in this one. All right, so next up here, let's head over to our legendary cards revealed today. It's E.T.C, God of Metal, a 2 mana 1/4 for Warrior. After a friendly rush minion attacks, you deal 2 damage to the enemy hero. So potentially a way to chunk down your opponents pretty significantly. If you can get, 3-4 different rush attacks off in a turn, that's like 8 damage here for a nice little 2 mana card that's also a reasonably okay body on board. Nothing to write home about, but 4 health is halfway decent. So how does that work, right? How is that going to be played? Is this something you play on curve? No, I certainly don't think so. This is something that comes down later in the game. You're going to play this with a Restless Mummy to get some chip damage through. You might even be able to pull off some crazy shenanigans. You've got the Galakrond Scion of Ruin to summon you 3 rush minions. You've got Broom turns, which can actually do pretty crazy amount of stuff because it turns out this does work with anything that's been given rush. It doesn't have to have the rush keyword on it. So you play this with any random assortment of minions and a Broom. The Broom and this itself are both going to proc E.T.C God of Metal plus whatever else gets rush in the meantime. So you could easily, create and concoct scenarios where 5, 6, 7, 8 plus attacks go off in a single turn. I've even seen some OTK possibilities with like multiples of these and Bloodsworn mercenaries and brooms and so on and so forth. So a lot of interesting potential there. I think the real question for a card like this one is the context of what deck it's going to fit into. There's not really a warrior deck that's all about rush minions right now. We've got rush minions that pop into warrior. We've got good rush minions that have proven themselves, but there's usually only a couple in a given deck. So are you going to need more than just a few rush minions to really make this thing thrive? And then what does that deck exactly look like? Maybe it's just a control warrior where this is like the final push and you just get enough damage through. I think there's like a, pseudo rush, tempo, and rage deck of some sort where you're just happy to play a lot of good on tempo, on curve things. This is a way to get, that chip damage through, soften up your opponent so that you can eventually finish them off with like a big Grom, Hellscream charge, maybe some Core Kron, Bloodsworn, Mercenary shenanigans, etc. And this just helps you get there. And maybe it's kind of a free 2-mana tax for, 6 to 8 damage. That's a really good return from a mana standpoint. But there's going to need to be a reason to run this. If you're getting the damage anyway, you might not need this. Maybe you don't want to have to run that much rush stuff. So it's an interesting card because it kind of feels like free almost. You just toss it in for 2 mana, you get a great result. The body on board is fine, and maybe that contributes to the game plan. In other scenarios, it's not going to impact the game at all, because unless this is exactly lethal or it's some kind of combo setup, maybe that 8 chips damage just doesn't do anything at all, and this feels like a dead card on board because it didn't actually help you swing the board or anything else. Your rush minions might do that, but they could also do that on their own without the E.T.C. God of Metal, and you get just hero power for some extra life. So it's tough for me. Like, I see a lot of interesting potential, and I think things could go crazy with this one, but I could also see it being left out very easily. That said, I'm still going to rate this on that potential because I can imagine a deck that finds a slot for this where that chip damage does matter and where they're either drawing enough cards or playing towards a certain game plan that E.T.C. contributes just enough to make the cut. But I don't think this is going to be a standout card. I don't really think this is going to fuel any kind of crazy combo. I just think it's solid and occasionally a good fit. So moving on here to Ringmaster Whatley for Warrior. It's a 5-mana 3/5 battlecry, draw a mech, dragon, and a pirate. So it's like a new Curator. We had Curator back in the day drawing us 3 different minion type cards. That was a little more expensive. This is a little cheaper and smaller. Does not have taunt. But I think the 3 minion types here are actually pretty good fits for Warrior right now. Looking across all 3 of those, with mechs, there's a handful of good options. You've got like Scrap Golem, which is a good mid-game taunt. You got Tomb Warden, which can be some big sticky bodies, defensive bodies in the late game. You've got Omega Devastator still in standard format, which is crazy for another 4 months, 5 months or so. And then for dragons, you got just like Deathwing Mad Aspect. You could do Alexstrasza. Dragons aren't hard to find spots for. There's going to be a lot of good dragons. You can play the on-curve 6-mana Rush Dragon. It'd be pretty nice to follow this up. And for pirates, you've actually got some good options too. I think Dread Corsair makes sense if your deck's running a lot of weapons. Horde Pillager could give you more weapons back. You've got even Kobold Sticky Finger, Captain Greenskin in those 5-mana slots to get some pretty meaty pirates out of this as well. And drawing 3 cards for 5 mana is awesome when it's attached to a 3/5 body. Like, that's not a huge commitment. Now, clearly, this is still going to be hard to play sometimes on turn 5 when you're like trying to stay alive as Warrior, you're just barely scraping by. But as you start to turn the corner, stabilize in the mid game, or if you're playing against slower decks, then you will have time to play this. Like, you can toss this in with a shield block and you'll probably be fine. You can toss this in with a brawl at 10 mana and that's just going to work out just okay. And it helps you filter down your deck to the things you really need, helps you find that Deathwing Mad Aspect, which is an amazing card, etc. It can help you find Risky Skipper if you're looking for that and you're not running Ankar. It can help you find your weapon removal with your Kobold Sticky Finger. So there are a few ways to use this as sort of a tech tutor card, also just a way to draw a lot of resources and have stuff to do, which can be great for slower style decks, of course, of which Warrior is really, really good at doing that generally. So I think because this is 5 mana, even though it doesn't have taunt, it actually becomes notably easier for Warrior to play this than a card like Curator, because you can still do quite a bit on top of that 5 mana. You're not committing your almost entire turn like you'd often feel like you were with Curator. You still have that Brawl, you still have that Blade Storm, you still have a hero power, and that's why Whatley feels a little bit safer to me. So I absolutely think you could see this in just a general control Warrior deck. You could see this in like a mid-range deck, and of course, most notably is N'Zoth. This fits into a Menagerie build. If you're playing N'Zoth the Old God, you want to summon a bunch of different minion types. This finds you 3 of them rather nicely, easily, and your N'Zoth is more or less loaded up to have some pretty good options. Maybe not super defensive options unless you run Scrap Golem in that scenario, but still just good minions to fill in those various minion types for N'Zoth. So I like this card. I think it's really cool. It's not a home run deck defining sort of card, but it's a really nice tool for Warriors to have in their toolkit. So speaking of Menagerie cards, we've got another one here for Warrior. It's the Ringmaster's Baton. It goes right along there with Whatley. A 2-mana 1/3 weapon that reads, after your hero attacks, give a mech, dragon, and pirate in your hand +1/+1. So a hand buff card for the same Menagerie minion types there. And clearly you could play Whatley, put those in your hand, play your Baton, buff those suckers up. You get quite a few stats back. I think more reasonably, you're probably going to play this in the early game and hope to have some of those things in hand already. Maybe just a couple's fine. You're building up to have that really strong Scrap Golem on turn 5. And Scrap Golem is a card that likes to be buffed because its Death Rattle scales with stats. You've also got like 2 Morden, which scales really nicely too because the buffs get copied into the extra minion. So there are definitely some mechs that make sense here. The Rush Dragon's good to get extra stats too to help take better trades. Pirates, maybe you don't care as much about buffs, but a bigger risky skipper can help you get off more whirlwinds. So even that has some potential utility as well. And of course, who knows what we're going to see else to what else we're going to see to fill these particular minion types and this archetype. Now, all that said, the challenge here for Ringmaster's Baton to me is just how slow it is. It is preposterously slow. It takes 3 attacks, so 3 turns essentially, to get the full effect of the buffs. Once you've done that, it still takes even more mana to put those buffs into play because you have to spend that mana on that minion that you buffed, right? So you have to play the Scrap Golem, whatever it is, the Rush Dragon. And then sometimes if that minion isn't immediately interacting with the board, it might even take you more time to put those stats into effect because they have to then attack later if it doesn't have Rush or Taunt. So in a lot of ways, it just feels like it's going to take you 4, 5, 6 turns to realize the full effect of the Ringmaster's Baton. And at the end of the day, it's a total of 9/9 in stats, assuming you pull through this one time. And I have to ask myself, like, can't Warrior just maybe get more like return in stats from other weapons? Reaper Scythe, for instance, clearing 3 4/4s is 12/12 in stats immediately right there, thanks to its Spell Burst. Now that's a 4 mana card, obviously, but Warrior often has time to play those sorts of things if they're playing a slower, grindier style that this sort of card would encourage. So, would you rather have Angar to just draw through your deck and answer minions better on board at 2 attack instead of 1? Because this might have trouble answering things on board effectively. Would you have Livewire Lance to give you lackeys that generate brawls and crazy dragons and resources? All those seem like better options to me right now. Now, clearly, this is going to survive through a format rotation that those other cards won't. Most of the ones I mentioned are going to be rotating at some level. So maybe it finds a home after that. But right now, I feel like it's definitely the weakest and slowest of the Warrior weapons. Even in a Menagerie build, I don't know if the stat return here is quick enough or meaningful enough for a card like this one to make the cut. It feels like you're just going to be kind of swinging face and barely really care that these stats happened at all. Often, if you're trying to play this early, you might not even have the minions in hand yet, depending on how dense your deck has to be. That said, I could even see some crazy scenarios where you go like Southsea Deckhand, you buff it up a bunch, you get another one of these off Horde Pillager, and maybe Pirate Warrior makes this work. So who knows? It's got some weird fringe potential. I just don't think most of the time this one's quick enough to really make sense in modern day Hearthstone. All right, next up here, pretty freshly revealed card, the Balloon Merchant. 4 mana 3/5 for Paladin. Battlecry, give your Silverhand recruits +1 attack and Divine Shield. So some more Silverhand recruit synergy stuff here. We already got Day at the Fair, which is going to summon you a bunch of Silverhand recruits. Standard format also has like Air Raid and of course just your natural hero power. And this gives you a pretty solid buff to both increase the resiliency of your Silverhand recruits and also make them more threatening via that +1 attack. So that could be great for trading into your opponent's board if you want to use those Divine Shields a little bit more reactively. You could also just, try to increase the survivability of your board for future buffs or just to push damage or any sort of wide board token buff. A lot of plays on the Balloon Merchant. So exciting to see that if Silverhand recruits work out. I'm sure Wild format is always scared of stuff like this, even though it's not an odd card. Even Paladin, though. Even Paladin. Could use a card like this to great success because they're still pumping out a lot of Silverhand recruits in most cases. That said, we don't really talk about Wild too much in our reviews. So in standard format, certainly more limited applications than in Wild, but nonetheless, a card that I think is fine. You're maybe not super excited about the 3/5 aspect of it. You might want it to be a little bit more high pressure in this style of deck that's going more wide board. But with Day at the Fair, if that works out, hey man, this is the follow-up that you need. Also, just I want to talk about from a flavor standpoint, he's giving out a yellow balloon, which is a Divine Shield that gets popped. That's kind of sad, but also amazing. Also, the girl is holding an Ashbringer, so it's like Paladin flavor all over the place. Also, one of the balloons has Cthulhu's Eye. That's awesome. So all in all, really fun flavor for this card. Pretty fantastic. Also, a card I think could see some play. The only challenge, of course, is that archetype going to take off? Does Silverhand Recruits make sense? Because if not, you're not going to want to do this just for your hero power, right? This doesn't make its way into a normal tempo deck. It's got to have that Silverhand Recruit focus or this won't get there. This is a pretty niche card in a way, but a niche card certainly that has a lot of output and power level baked into it. Moving on to the Carousel Gryphon here. I forgot to include the corrupted version of the card. It's got tentacles and it's purple. You guys can find it, sorry. But it's a 5-mana 5/5 mech for Paladin. Pay attention to that mech tag. It's got Divine Shield at the base, and then when you corrupt it, it'll gain +3/+3 and Taunt. So it becomes a big 8/8 Taunt Divine Shield mech once you've corrupted it. And guess what? That's amazing for N'Zoth. We got our mech for N'Zoth. It's like we're assembling the Power Rangers or Voltron or something here to build this crazy N'Zoth. So yeah, obviously, when you play N'Zoth, if you summon an 8/8 Divine Shield mech, you're going to be really pumped. That's pretty nice. You already get the elemental from the weapon, so it's all starting to come together for Menagerie Paladin rather nicely. And yeah, that's exactly where Carousel Gryphon's going to thrive. Now, to be frank, I think most people like this card at a base level more than I do. A lot of people say, hey, it's a 5-mana 5/5 with Divine Shield. That's not bad. I don't really agree with that. I don't think that's a particularly strong card these days. Paladin's already summoning, 5-mana 8/8 Divine Shields that heal you with Libram of Hope. And Devout Pupil is like a 0-mana, almost 5/5 Divine Shield with Taunt, right? There's just faster, better ways to do similar sorts of things in Paladin. So this, I don't think, carves out a spot in like other Paladin decks unless you care about the minion type tag here specifically. For some kind of Menagerie build, I just don't think it's going to be fast enough or good enough because it still has that corrupt problem where you're not really playing this until turn 7, presuming you corrupt it on turn 6 perfectly if everything goes smoothly. So it starts to lose impact later and later that it comes into the game. Opponents just have more time to kill you while this is sitting in hand. Also, like all corrupt cards, not a particularly good top deck, especially at 5 mana, because if you top deck this, to then corrupt it, you have to spend 6 mana, which means you can't even play this the same turn. So you're waiting an additional turn. So corrupt cards at 5+ mana, I think, have even more problems than others. So a card with still some degree of potential, thanks to N'Zoth. This is clearly the one you'd want to see. Next up here is Wicked Whispers. I love this artwork so much. It's like really setting the scene rather nicely here for Darkmoon Faire. It's a 1-mana spell for Warlock. It discards your lowest cost card, and then it gives your minions +1/+1. So we've got a nice little board buff here for 1 mana with a downside. Think about like Grim Rally in the past for Warlock did something similar. That was a pretty solid card. You had to trade off a minion on board for +1/+1. I think this is actually less of a downside. Often that card in hand in a really aggressive deck that's caring about tempo and pressure values the minion on board more than they value the card in hand because you want that pressure to stick. And certainly if you're buffing it, you want that minion to be around to receive that buff, which is really nice. So even discard synergies aside, I think this is favorable in comparison to a card like Grim Rally. And then we've also got discard synergies potentially. Currently that's Bone Web Egg in standard format. The egg that summons you 2/1 minions if it gets discarded. That's a great target for this because that would summon you 2/1s. Based on interactions we've seen in Hearthstone in the past, those would get buffed by this spell because the discard happens in the middle, apparently. That's what we think anyway, which means you're going to get 2 3/2 minions when you discard your Bone Web Egg with this card. You just have to make sure it's the cheapest card in hand, which I don't think would be too hard. If you're already playing your 1-drops and stuff alongside this, shouldn't be hard to get rid of all the 1-drops, isolate that 2-mana card in a zoo, fast aggressive deck, and discard the right thing, get that big swing. Suddenly, a 1-mana that summons 2 3/2s and buffs your board feels very powerful. So I could certainly see this working in those more aggressive Warlock decks, of which we know are very successful throughout the history of Hearthstone. I think this is a really solid card for that archetype, and if we get any more other discard synergy stuff in standard format, this could blow up even more as an awesome option. So definitely keep an eye on Wicked Whispers. High Exarch Yrel is a 4-star card. E.T.C. God of Metal is a 3-star card. Ringmaster Whatley is a 4-star card. Ringmaster's Baton is a 2-star card. Balloon Merchant is a 3-star card. Carousel Gryphon is a 3-star card. Wicked Whispers is a 4-star card. And there you go, folks. That wraps it up for this review. Glad I stayed up a little late for this one. Yrel's pretty exciting to see. That said, I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Is this just too slow? Maybe it's not good at all, you think? Let me know. Happy to hear it. What else did you like? Do you think ETC's got it or not? A lot of debate on that particular card, I think. I'm curious to hear all your takes. Thanks as always for watching. I guess subscribe to the channel. Some of you do, some people don't. They still watch the videos. I guess I don't really care, but it's nice to see the number. So if you feel like being nice today, I guess I'll take it. I'll take it. That said, whether you do or not, thanks much for watching, and until next time, game on.